gap, and I think that's quite interesting to explore here today. But the big thing is, you know, why is that gap there? And I think the answer is really pretty simple. I think we need communication and marketing to step in here, because essentially we have a communication battle, because on one side we have, you know, advertising as usual, talking about consuming more, buying more. On the other side we have, you know, this green messaging about a sustainable life. And, you know, if those two were armies that were going up against each other, we would have quite a great army on the one side, represented by advertising. $600 billion is spent on advertising, giving us these messages every day. So just for the fairness of it, let's say it's and simplicity, let's say it's a 100-man strong army. On the other side, we have, you know, the green messaging. And think about how often you actually do hear messages about more sustainable consumption. It's really not that often. So it's probably like a 3-man strong army. So we have a 100-man strong army versus a 3-man strong army. And then we ask ourselves, how can we actually triumph, and how can you push consumption and demand in a more responsible direction? So for me, you know, the key is demand, and advertising drives demand. So if people aren't buying your green products and services, I think there's two simple answers. One is maybe you're not communicating it enough and loud enough. Secondly, maybe the stories you're telling isn't the right ones. Because essentially, and I think if there's any marketeers in this room, one thing advertising is very good at is actually driving aspirations, dreams, emotions. And most of the time when I come across green messaging, it's really not that interesting. And I'm just going to frame one example here. You probably all know Earth Hour. So WWF is a big initiative. And the global ask is, of course, to turn off the light at home and light a candle. And for me, you know, come on, we've had electricity for 130 years. Why do they ask us to turn off electricity and behave like cavemen? For me, that's not a very aspirational world. That's not a very aspirational future that I want to be part of. So for me, I think if we should get something out of this session, I would say, you know, green is not left field. You know, green can be fun, it can be sexy, and it can be cool. So I'd pretty much pass the challenge on to you guys and could communicate more and communicate better.
If I may, probably, that was a perfect introduction for you, Aaron, because last time we met, I said green, and you looked quite upset, because the word green is being abused, is not being properly communicated, and is not hitting its target. You have a position which is, well, Dr. Arab is first of all the chief of Sustainable Consumption and Production branch of the United Nations Environment Program. But when we talk about sustainable consumption and demand, this is the man that has put all the knowledge together and shared it for several years now. So maybe better an introduction from you.
Thank you, Ivano. Good morning, everybody. Green, I reacted negatively when we last talked about it because it's misused as a word. And there is too much of greenwashing around the word green. So I would definitely not be the one in UNEP who have been the one promoting green economy to reject it, but simply it has to be put in context and used properly. And if we want to move seriously towards sustainability, we have to understand what green economy can bring in. And in order to deliver green economy, what do you need for that? And I have been advocating for more than 20 years now about the necessity to move and to look at sustainable consumption and production. It has been extremely difficult experience. It's not yet achieved. The green economy is going through it because when you start touching on behavior and consumption patterns, people will tell you, don't touch it, this is none of your business. Would it be government? Would it be the business sector? Would it be the consumers? You have to find opportunities to make them change. The problem is that for the last 20 years, if not more, the world has been focusing mostly on the problems. the problems of climate change and its consequences, the problem of ecosystem degradation, the consequences, the problem of poverty, the problem and so on and so on. We have not focused enough on the opportunities to make the change and to move further. An example would be on climate change. We just focus on the political discussions. It's complicated. We're dealing with looking at the last agreement that we could have this year in Paris. But meanwhile, there are a lot of things going on towards climate mitigation, for example. Rather than focusing on the policy aspect and the political decisions, I would tend to look at what can we deliver on the ground. When we started the work, and it's the same for green economy, it has always been perceived as a concept coming from developed economy, which that's where it starts. But you have to put it in a context and bring it down to developing economies and to the whole world, because we all said that we are now a global village. Whatever happened in a country has an impact elsewhere. So working with UNIDO starting in '94, we had the global initiative on cleaner production, which we call the NCPC, National Cleaner Production Center Network. And quickly we moved to the whole issue of supply and demand, but in an integrated manner, in a system approach. And this is what makes it difficult, because you are linking supply and demand, trying to understand how this influences the other, and taking a decision that could be, I would say, win-win for each one of them. And then you realize that you have to work with all the stakeholders. We, being an intergovernmental organization, of course, our partners are the government. And what concerns us, these are the Minister of Environment and UNIDO, Minister of Industry, and so on. But then you have to work with the industry, how you bring them in on the same table with governments, which usually, or at least politically speaking, they hate each other. They don't want to be on the same table. And when you bring in consumer information, they are here just to complain that they are not getting what they have to get, and so on. How to find a mechanism to put them around the table. Fortunately for us, after 20 years of, I would say, lobbying, promoting, advocating, we have succeeded in putting as one of the 3 top priorities of the world economy, I don't know if you are well aware of it, that emerged from Rio+20, which are poverty eradication, sustainable management of natural resources, and sustainable consumption and production. It was very tough to put it in an agenda. We have it now. And luckily for us, we had now a 10-year framework of program on sustainable consumption production with a series of programs which, believe it or not, we got it thanks to the Group of 77 and China, because we had strong opposition from a certain number of countries that I will not list here, but now we have it. It's mandate for all the countries, and it's something that we are delivering now. So I hope we'll have more to tell you about the necessity for moving to sustainable consumption and production, but you mentioned about demand and so on. What we need is to make the case, to explain to each one of them, government, business sector, consumers, why it is in their interest to move towards sustainable consumption production, why they have to move towards a transformative change, how they have to do it, and how it makes good economic sense. It's extremely important. At the end of the day, it all turns to money. So if we can put it this way, we can convince the partners and bring them together. Thank you.
Well, we always look at the economic side, and obviously we are trying to emphasize this green economy as a concept. Although I personally believe that economic is only half of the equation. A lot has to do with people, and we've seen this transformation happening in different areas, different industries. And one of these is energy. Energy is obviously quite a relevant theme for us. To this, I would actually introduce Jan, who's the global head of energy for Navigant. And Jan, if I recall, you guys have developed the concept of an energy cloud, which it's a paradigm shift from the traditional energy model that we all know to exist right now.
Correct. Thanks, Ivano. Yes, we believe that the energy industry is at a tipping point. And if you look at industry transformations in the past, and take the most recent one, the telco industry, it takes about 15 years for an industry to really transform. But there's also a lead-in period of 5 to 6 years to a point where change really happens in an industry. We've seen a lot of policy discussions and some policy changes. We've seen a lot of pilots around smart grid and smarter technologies. We've seen pilots around energy efficiency, demand-side management, globally, if you will. Going forward, we believe that we're going into an implementation phase, and change will happen where we're convinced that the traditional model of generation, transmission, distribution of power to the consumers will completely change. And we've developed this concept called the energy cloud, where there are distributed energy resources, partly renewables. And by the way, after 2017, the growth of distributed energy generation will be bigger globally than the growth of centralized generation. And that says a lot of how close we are to the tipping point. We'll have a smarter infrastructure where actually consumers will have insight into their usage. They can sign up for demand-side management, demand response programs. If they will, they can manage their own power. They can also generate their own power. So customer choice within the energy cloud will become one of the biggest drivers, where I, as a customer, and whether I'm a residential customer or a commercial or industrial customer, have the choice to buy my power from a provider or generate my own power. Rooftop solar on residential houses, microgrids for C&I customers, virtual power plants. Storage will become a big game changer combined with renewables. So customer choice will actually drive a lot of the transformation combined with technology. And then we see actually regulation and market structures and organizations follow. The utilities will reinvent themselves. They will have to reinvent themselves like the telcos did as well, going from wired to wireless. So going into this new reality of the energy cloud, I think the traditional players will reinvent themselves. There'll be new players in the space as well. Now, managing demand and supply across the energy cloud becomes pretty complex if you have distributed energy resources. And then if you have a lot of different players contributing to both supply as well as management of energy usage, data and how you manage data will be key. I will stop there. There's more to it. To wrap up, the consumer will mature from just receiving the bill, paying the bill, to now I have a smart meter. I can see what my usage is. To energy management systems. To do I generate my own power? Do I use my electric vehicle as a storage and source of energy during off-peak time. So the consumer will become more sophisticated as well. Not every consumer will be the same. Some consumers want to actively manage their usage. Others will, set and forget. But there's technologies that can actually support that. And others will want to generate their own usage and sell it to a neighborhood storage facility, where then my neighbor can buy power from that storage facility. So we're going to see different business models around that.
Absolutely, and I think this is also a good introduction to Jerry, who can probably share some of these lessons learned from the market perspective.
Yeah, thank you. Jan and I are sitting next to each other, but we're remarkably aligned in our view of the world. My background is in the PV and energy storage industries, together with industrial automation and building automation. And my perspective here is, as with a lot of things, we have some good news and we have some bad news. And the good news is, I think it's good news anyway, that we're probably all going to live 10 to 15 years longer than our grandparents did. And the bad news is that means that our pensions have got to last for a lot longer than they would have had to do otherwise. And in this time of extremely low interest rates, it means that our savings are actually growing at a very low rate, whereas the energy costs, for example, in the UK, in the last 10 years, energy costs have gone up 158%. So come the day when we're pensioners, we're going to have energy costs as an extremely high part of our expenditure. And it's something that's completely out of our control right now. Any one of us could go home and find an envelope from the utility telling us that our fuel bills have gone up 10% and there's nothing we can do about it. And so, as I said, I'm highly aligned with Jan's thinking here that actually one of the things we can do about it is to generate our own energy. And so my perspective is that decentralized generation, particularly energy use, generation yourself, and storage and self-consumption is going to be the key model for the future. And this puts a tremendous challenge on utilities because at the moment when there's only a relatively small number of self-generators relative to the total population, it really doesn't impact the generators, the utilities model. But when millions of people are generating sufficient energy for their own use, when they're storing their own energy, then it does put a significant challenge upon utilities and their ability to meet their generally government-given mandates to be able to provide power to the population. And so it will lead towards the financial impacts of stranded assets, and it will put a great challenge onto the utilities business model. And so one of the ideas I think that could be interesting for a utility under those conditions is really to enter into some sort of take or pay contract where the utility will provide to you a continuous level of power 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that will be matched against your average consumption. But it will be a way of the utilities flat loading their generation. We heard yesterday that there are power stations operating at 50% plus efficiency, but that's only when they're running at their optimum output. And if we're all self-generating, we won't need those power stations to be operating at their efficient point, and therefore they'll be operating far less efficiently. So I believe we're on the cusp, as we've heard from the other contributors, of a fundamental change in the way in which we, as energy consumers, become energy generators, and that right of self-determination, the democratization of energy generation and energy usage.
Thank you. And the perspective that I also want to bring to everyone is that we're not only looking at the individual. Obviously, many of us are participating here in our personal form. So we'll try to understand how does this impact, how does it change our lifestyle, what we're accustomed to. But it also has to be looked at how does it change the environment we operate within. So for example, Rana is the Industrial Development Officer with UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and she liaises with many of these industries. So you probably have a contribution from both sides, the supply and the demand.
Yeah. Thanks, Ivano, for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. So indeed, as the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, my intervention will be really more focused on the supply and the role of industry, especially the large industries, in actually promoting sustainable production and consumption. And I'll be taking a slightly different viewpoint than the three presenters, so Thomas and Jerry and Jan, because actually we work more in developing countries where customers do not necessarily have the knowledge to make those choices. So they are not really the ones who influence the larger industries to take the decision to actually promote sustainable goods. And this is why we actually engage with these large corporates to establish, for example, CSR programs, so corporate social responsibility. That's where we see basically large end users proactively trying to promote sustainability. So we try to shift, it's not just corporate social responsibility, it's actually integrating sustainability into the CSR concepts that's going to drive consumption. So I'd like to give an example. For example, the government of India actually has a program where all the large profit-making enterprises, they do have to put up 2% of their profits to support CSR activities. And that's now when they're trying to look into how to integrate sustainability into that and bringing this then from just corporate social responsibility into corporate social values. And then from there trying to see where they could play a role in educating the consumer so that the consumer knows about the choices that they want to make. Another example I'd also like to bring in, so as UNIDO, we're also engaged as a lead agency in something we call the Industrial Energy Efficiency Accelerator. And this is, this is part of a bigger platform which is under the Sustainable Energy for All platform that you all must be aware of. And there we are also again looking into the role of the large end users in promoting sustainable energy down their supply chain. So it's not enough that just me as a large corporate, I just implement energy management within my own enterprise, but also how do I actively bring this down to the supply chain and bring those small and medium-sized enterprises who do not necessarily have the skills nor the know-how to apply you know, sustainable consumption and production patterns into their production. So how do I actively engage them and bring them on board? Yeah, thanks.
Exactly, and what I would also like to bring to the attention is, yes, we do speak a lot about energy, we're passionate about energy, but it's not only energy. For us, sustainable consumption is looking at the demand from various points of view, whether this means water, waste, time. Essentially what we're trying to do is optimize the way we do things to either retain or achieve more with a smaller amount of resources. So obviously energy is very easy to discuss because it's quite tangible. We have users on one side demanding X amount of power for their lighting, for their cooling needs. On the other side, we have the utilities who traditionally were the manufacturers of this asset. And we have an ever-changing environment which is bringing new dimension, decentralization to the table. But along the same line, we have similar issues with waste. So all of a sudden, we, especially here in the UAE, there is a strong demand for recycling. But where is the industry that actually facilitates the downstream operation? So we collect all this recyclable waste. What happens to it next? How do we, from a user perspective, avoid it in the first place? So it's very easy for us to say, oh, we need more industry to reduce, to actually treat the waste, or we need more efficient technologies for our air condition. But at the same time, I see a person in the audience wrapped around the scarf because it is colder. So why can't we create processes which are more acceptable, which do not require so many resources in the first place, whether this is the packaging of a bottle of water or something to do with the way we turn on and turn off the lighting. Now, on this, probably I want to start with you because you brought a pretty good topic to the table, yep. And it's this concept, this dialogue from an advertising standpoint. I actually think that we as end users, we are the cause of this big demand, because the more we demand, the more the utility will provide to us.
Yes, and I think one of the important things that came out from, I think, all the panelists was actually the word choice, and having the choice between A and B. And I think an important thing is actually also to stop using words like end users and consumers and just call them people, because people have a choice, and this is very much about empowerment. And I think the brands, because we know that people want this change, and they want brands to deliver that change. And I read some recent numbers, even from the region here, that about 60% is actually aware of climate change. So the thing is, how do you empower people to take the right decisions? And again, I think that's really about saying, why is product A different from product B? It's maybe about thinking differently about business models, where you can give people different options, where they're not necessarily hooked up to their utility, where they don't have choices. And I think if we look at what happens now digitally, it's so interesting, you know, with platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. So I think if the big brands of this world, if the big industries of this world don't realize that, I think people will take matters into their own hand. And in the session before, Elkington spoke a lot about, you know, the young generation and what they can do in terms of this. So I think it's very much about looking at how do we empower people, and how do we tell engaging stories about sustainability. But because there are a lot of interesting stories to be told.
Arab, you wanted to?
Yes, I want to clarify or correct sometimes a wrong perception. We talk about choice.
Yeah.
Who has the choice? Who are we targeting here? In this room, we are all very privileged persons compared to the rest of the world. There are at least 50% who do not satisfy their basic needs and who will have to consume. And we cannot stop them from consuming. What we have to make sure is that their right to consumption is fulfilled, but more efficiently, not making the mistakes that others are doing. I think we should not dismiss this. Whenever we talk about consumers and green consumptions and so on, usually we're targeting like 15–20% of the people, USA, Europe, OECD countries, few middle-class people in developing economies. The rest, 5 billion, we don't care about them. While we should focus on them, because these are the new consumers tomorrow. In the next 30 years, even less than that, 20 years, we expect to have 2 to 3 billion additional middle-class consumers, the ones that will be moving from poverty, growing up a little bit. If those new middle-class consumers consume the way we are consuming, we are all of us going to hell, and we know it. The problem is that we all know this, but generally we're doing nothing, because we have the position which is, it's not me, the other one is more responsible than me. We have lost the sense of common goods, and we concentrate on private ones. Of course, it's easy for me to say that because I'm part of this consuming society, and I'm trying to see if I can change. I'm not changing entirely. So when Ivano said it's not only about energy, and this is right, but energy is today the leading example because it's visible. And there are so many lost opportunities in energy that when you get the knowledge, you say, but where are we going? What's happening? Not only what the leaders are doing, which they have huge responsibility, but what the business people are doing in losing so many opportunities, and the consumers. I'll stick to the energy one. When we started about the crisis of energy, we focused very much on renewable energy. At the same time, we continue to manage inefficiently the other resources. It's the type of a person, and it's a real case. I had a Brazilian colleague who told me, Harab, you convinced me about green economy, sustainable consumption, production. I bought a hybrid car. I told him, what about the others? He told me, I still keep the 3 others because I need them. So how much he is going green? I mean, this is this issue of greenwashing. We have the issue of buildings, for example, that is obvious. We know today that 1/3 of energy can be saved just by changing our habits. 1/3. Governments do not have the right legislation. They do not impose it properly. They do not enable the people. The market is not ready for that. We keep on talking, and meanwhile, would it be United Arab Emirates, Gulf countries, United States, Europe, China, we are just losing billions of dollars by not applying the right regulation, which require enabling and so on, and not informing the consumers. We have consumers who would be well-informed, who would like to have good apartments that effectively are energy efficient, but they need some investment. They go to the bank, and they don't find somebody in the bank who understands that so that they can pay back their loan in certain conditions. So there are cases around the world on which we can work. And I beg you, please, let us focus on the lost opportunities, the low-hanging fruit from which we can get the accelerator that the sustainable energy for all is doing, but doing it also in other sectors. And then you do the same for water, which is much more critical, and you expand it to other sectors. So I can say more about that.
Absolutely. If I may, I actually wanted to pass it on to Jerry, because I want to see some of this perspective from...
Sure. I think in terms of messaging, let's face it, most of us don't actually know how much electricity we use. And I would like, I see they've got a very young member of the audience here. I'd like to ask you all to ask your kids to write down how much energy, take a meter reading every day and make a little chart at home. It's good for them, it's good education, but have a look at how much your energy consumption is. If you can, look at your water meter every day. Get the kids to do it and make a chart of that, because that engagement is as powerful as the marketing message. And then you can start to engage the youngsters in thinking, well, what can we do? Because we'll always talk about the kids leaving the lights on, we'll talk about the kids having the air conditioning on and the windows open. Let's actually engage them, because when we hear about the future middle classes, it is going to be these youngsters who are the ones who are going to be those middle class. They are going to be the consumers. If we can educate them now about energy efficiency and engage them now, then it'll make the journey in the future much easier to tread.
True. And Jan, you also wanted to add.
I wanted to react to what Arap was bringing up. Talking about low-hanging fruit, yes, absolutely, but you need to take a more fundamental view on infrastructure as well. In the next 50 years, there will be moving more people to cities than in the mankind so far. So there's going to be a huge urbanization happening over the next 50 years. There needs to be infrastructure and buildings developed, and that's where a lot of work has to be done between government and private sector and the people that are going to live in those cities. UAE has I think, a unique opportunity where with I think the energy demand for energy growing at high single-digit percentages over the next foreseeable couple of years. There's a lot of new infrastructure that has to be built. That's a unique opportunity to build smarter infrastructure that will actually support things like customer choice and the new technologies. In the developing countries, I think technology will be, so in the developed countries, I think customer choice is important. I think in the developing countries, technology will allow you to do things. And there's examples already of smaller microgrids in developing countries, renewables in developing countries. So it's still, for me, between customer choice and technologies, and I think regulation and market structures and organization trying to catch up and stay with what customers want and what technology allows us to do. Anyway.
Arab, so you were...
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about cities. John, before, when he made this summary this morning, John Kling said, we need to get the cities right. And I used to call the cities, I hope you can keep this in mind, the industry of the three quarters. There could be no sustainability or no green economy if not at city level and with cities and city managers. Unfortunately, they don't have any voice anywhere, or slowly they're coming up, hoping that Habitat 3 will give them the right voice for that. I should be criticized because I'm UNEP, an intergovernmental organization, so my ministers will tell me, what are you doing here? But anyhow, industries of the three quarters for a simple reason. In the next 20 years, and it depends from one region to another, you will have three quarters of the population. In Latin America, it will be 95%. They're already there. China has just shifted to below 50%, but they will reach 70 very soon. You have three quarters of the GDP at city level. You have three quarters of the resources consumed at city level. You have three quarters of CO2 emissions, and you have three quarters of pollution waste generation. So really the industry of the three quarters. Of course, this is an order of magnitude that varies between 70, 80, 85%. So managing cities properly and brings to the issue of urban metabolism and the infrastructure is absolutely critical. But to be able to do so, unfortunately, we miss a critical knowledge, which is the resource flow at city level in relation to the consumption patterns. I made a large survey in more than 200 cities, speaking with mayors. None of them, I'm talking about the best cases even in Europe, none of them is managing its city exactly as a business, in the sense that I have a company, I need those inputs, they will cost me so much, that's where my inputs are coming from, that's my production process, I'm losing resources, I'm producing waste, I want my employees to be satisfied so they can remain with the company. You can apply exactly the same thing at city level, but they don't have the data. So we're trying to work now with Toronto University, with the World Council on Data management to see how we can effectively get the data to allow the mayors to manage their cities from a resource perspective. Many people now in the discussion on climate change, and brings again to the infrastructure issue, when they talk about the city's resilience, they look at it from a climate mitigation point of view. They look at disasters, they look at water crisis and so on. You can look at it from a completely different angle, which is resilience from a resource perspective. How a city is resilient when they depend so much on oil coming from very far, not managed efficiently. I'm not saying that they should not bring it far, but not managed efficiently. How they can be as a resilient city if they depend on water that is coming just from 300 kilometers and they are not managing it efficiently. And you can do the same. The food. You know that food waste, we're losing 1/3 of our waste. Would it be production or consumption? Isn't this a stupid issue when people are sleeping without eating? 1/3 of the food is being lost, and we know it. What are we doing? There has been a campaign in Europe, I presented last time in Dubai here, what we call the ugly fruits. It was done in Europe and started in UK and so on. Just bring the information to the people, make them aware, not guilty. Pointing the finger is very bad. People will react the opposite. Accompany them, work with them, make them better informed, and we can have a much better managed cities.
Rana, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to complement what my colleague from UNEP just said and to emphasize the role of policy and also regional will, let's say. So for example, UNIDO and UNEP, we're collaborating on a program. It started in Asia, it's called Switch Asia, and now we're replicating it in the Mediterranean region, so SwitchMed. So this is a program in which we are looking exactly at the barriers that Arab had mentioned, so the policy barriers, the capacity building barriers, and trying to work with industries as well as other players in the region. So basically at the policy level, what we're trying to do is to promote regional policies to promote sustainable production and consumption. And then at the industry level, you know, many industries are not even aware of what are the opportunities that they could bring into the table. So what we are doing is trying to work with them on eco-efficient designs. So this is something, so it's not really something that they directly relate to. So we really need to build their capacities to be able to produce a good, because otherwise we're also putting a lot of standards, you know, globally that prevent the developing countries from being part of the equation. So this is where the role of agencies like UNEP and UNIDO is to build capacities to allow developing countries' companies to actually be part of the global agenda by supporting them to comply with eco-labels, with producing some new eco-efficient designs and supporting innovations. So,
absolutely, and I think, again, this is also my point of view is us as end users, us as individuals, have been empowered. Now we all have smartphones, and we keep on looking at them. We keep on moving around with them. So essentially, we've decided to be constantly tracked. Are we utilizing any of this data? Has anyone checked how many kilometers is driven every day? Are there better routes? Are there better ways of doing what we do naturally? Now, we're always and again, this is an argument that I've seen, especially in an environment like the UAE, where there is a lot of support for entrepreneurship. But have we challenged conventional norms, or are we waiting for someone else to do it? So the legislation is there, but us as the end user are taking a very passive role most of the time. We do go to the shop and choose the fancier packaging because it's more attractive. So from a marketing and side. So we look at a label, it says eco, green. We assume that that product is better than another because it's written there, rather than actually quantifying what is the benefit that they bring. And I saw this in statistics about detergents, for example, where a detergent produced locally can actually be specifically attuned to the quality of water, so it can be less aggressive than something produced for the mass markets, whereas it has to be compatible with the worst case scenario. So obviously we have similar realities. We accept the word green at its face value. We don't challenge. We don't actually look at it from what benefit does it bring to me. And probably the greenest product under our nose is the ugliest looking one on the bottom shelf without packaging, which does have a more sought design from its life cycle assessment, but doesn't appeal to the masses who are not actually pursuing that. Now, on that, I'm really keen to take the advertisement angle. Yeah. I mean, green is everywhere, but it's not the type of green we want.
Yeah, I think you touched on something important, you know, and we saw Elkington show the Tesla, and we saw the Solar Planet boat that, of course, looked attractive and cool. But also in terms of, you touched on the bottom of the pyramid, because that's essentially one of the big challenges that we got to face, the new people are turning into consumers. And we're doing a bit of work in Mozambique for a company that did dry toilets. So the innovation was there, we just needed to implement it. And we were going into these townships with the dry toilets, and we thought it was a great idea. Because what the alternative at that point would just basically be a hole in the ground. So very, very basic. But the thing we suddenly observed in quite a few of the townships was that they had stacked car tires, and then they had a wooden backrest. So they're imitating Western toilets. And as soon as they just got a little bit more money, they wouldn't buy. They wouldn't go near the dry toilet. They thought it was underneath them, you know. So they, of course, wanted to go the way we did, you know, buying this big water-intensive toilet. So I think we really need to change the big narrative, as you say, away from, you know, the ugly eco packaging to create something that's exciting and inspirational. And I think that's a big challenge. And if we don't solve it, it's not looking good.
Yes. Advertising, I think it will be good at one point to add to it responsible advertising, but still, what do you mean by responsible advertising? How you can be transparent about how you're doing it. And is it advertising to just get you consumer product, or it is an advertising in terms of information, giving you more information so you are a better informed consumer? There are many sides where you can look at it. We are mainly in the first one, which is pushing you to consume and driving you anyway. This is most of the advertising. Some pretend having some responsible advertising, but this also goes to the transparency and the reporting that is coming up now. Most companies, how they are behaving on that, and more the UN system is thinking about it, even to go a little bit beyond GRI, Global Reporting Initiative. And we have been mandated, and UNEP and GRI are doing it today, to look at the sustainability reporting, where governments are also involved with the public companies, not only the private one, and they have either to comply or explain. And this has been pushed a lot by South Africa and Brazil, who are working very much on that. We developed this initiative, and it's moving forward. But let me come back to what you said, Ivano, regarding waste and the way we're handling it, because it's extremely important. Allow me. We're all using these computers and so on. How many of you know that the critical elements that are here are recycled at best 2%? At best. And these are the critical elements for the world economy tomorrow. Just because we're not aware of it, we are not concentrating on that, we are not making the right research, we are not innovating around that. And we are waiting for the crisis, and then when we'll have the crisis, the price of this equipment that was very high goes to the bottom, then will increase again, and then we'll get to another crisis. And unfortunately, human beings and the government will react only when they are in front of crisis. They cannot have a preemptive approach. And this is something that we now need to look at it and try to see how to handle it. In terms of waste, if you go to researcher, they can put you the model, and it's practically done by the business sector today. If you do the right design from the beginning, you can reach a level where you can dismantle better your equipment. Would it be a building? Would it be a computer? So that you can recycle it. It has to be programmed in such a way, not to just program to be thrown after 2 years. Companies are not yet there. We know that they're investing. We're working with the biggest companies of computers and so on. They're investing that, but they're not putting their market on the product because of competitiveness and because of what we will have there. So government have to take a leading role in trying to see how we can effectively move on this issue. You can do the same, what's happening everywhere is the building sector. I mean, we know today that building material can be recycled almost to 100%, almost, and we are not doing it. Why? Why are we losing so much money? Why are we still bringing other equipment, putting it, sending back the other equipment, not assessing the cost and so on? Is it because the legislation is not good? Is it because there are too many incentives there? Is it we have to look at it. And we have looked, for example, and I know I'm long, Ivano, sorry, at the building sector. There's something that is very interesting. We did it with the business companies, not UN. We asked several builders to come on the same table and to analyze the supply chain of the material for construction. We did it from mining till designing, architecture, until disposal and so on. And we have identified 10 very specific points where if you put the right people on the table, you can improve the process at each level in terms of resource efficiency. Whatever the resources, till the end, and then you get a perfect building that can be then easily recyclable, you can live better in it. It's not science, it's feasible. We need the right legislation and the right information, not to use advertising.
Arab, I agree, and before opening maybe to a few questions and see what the audience thinks, I wanted to share, I meet a lot of people, I'm constantly traveling, and I've really met some marvelous individuals. But once I met a person whose job fascinated me. He was a manager for, his only job was to calculate when this phone should become obsolete. Now, I'm a user of Apple product, so I'm not a good example, but essentially I'm surprised of how that phone becomes obsolete every year. So the life cycle of the phone has shrunk dramatically, and when my parents used to say they don't build them like they used to, I used to think that they were just out of their minds. They look so much better, they look so much more functional. Essentially, they had a point in the sense that today they build them to last a very specific amount of time, whether these are vehicles we drive or phones, simply because they're the legislation within that environment requires them to provide spare parts for X amount of years. So they do not want to continue producing spare parts, and as a result, they'll make sure that the amount of critical failures within the design happens sooner rather than later. Now, this is actually being studied and quantified, and we are the ones buying those products. We buy products at face value, so we actually say, oh, this printer is so cheap, and then every single cartridge is 3 times the cost of that printer. So why is this happening? Why are we the cause of the problem, and why we're not taking any action is quite unusual for me to understand. But I do not know if anyone in the audience would like to raise any questions at this time.
I have a question for the UN. For the United Nations, it seems the initiatives that you are taking is highly related to new building or new environment that needs to be involved. But my question is, has been there any initiative taken for any for already developed environment, like to enhance the energy consumption? This is the first part of the question. The second part, is there any initiative being taken to increase the awareness of people to consume energy wisely?
What we are trying, I mean, basically is the consumption patterns compared to the Western ones. Is it this one? How are we making the people aware about this and the consequences? Okay, you are touching here about all the stakeholders and different partners who have to work in this context when it comes to the buildings. You know, we are trying to see, we launched 8 years ago an initiative on sustainable building and climate, to explain to the people about the opportunities we have there. And that's why I've been speaking with many ministers, and with due respect, I used to tell them you are stupid, and respecting them because you are losing a lot of money. But then you come to the we're trying to see how much we can promote local architecture or buildings with local material rather than bringing from outside, and making the best to see how you can retrofit what exists, or making sure that the new buildings do respect certain number of criteria, not only just a star, because I know that there are green building ratings and so on. Not of them are the most perfect, not of them are well implemented. People don't know about it. I know about all of them. I work very closely with the World Green Building Council, with the World Green Building Council. So it is essential that we get the whole system right, in the sense that if you have the legislation, it should be already done together with the business sector, because governments, I represent an intergovernmental organization, they do not have all the knowledge to do the right legislation. They have to collaborate with the people who will be implementing it. They have to consult with them to make sure that the legislation we get is effectively implementable, and that the market who will follow on that is the market is ready to provide you with the elements you need, the equipment you need, the facilities you need, and so on. Many times we promote something and you go to the market and you don't have it. Or you work with the business sector and they will tell you this is not implementable, we cannot do it. Or the consumer asks for something and the market is not really good for that. They have to just turn around and get something even more expensive that will not encourage them. So it all comes at the end of the day to a system approach where you bring the different stakeholders around the table in order to discuss for a common good. Unfortunately, and I repeat it, in almost all countries, except at some city level, this kind of consultation does not occur. And the system is not tried for that.
Rana, you also wanted to add something.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can complement that. So, you know, the energy efficiency accelerator that I mentioned in the very beginning. So this is a platform. One is industry, one is buildings, one is lighting, one is fuel efficiency. So there are 5 different accelerators that tackle the different dimensions of energy efficiency. And what we actually do there is we try to bring best practice examples that tackle the different barriers to energy efficiency. So if you look at energy efficiency and think, why is it not happening? Classically, you're going to look into policy-related barriers, technology-related barriers, information-related barriers. So within this platform, what we are really trying to bring is to share best practices from around the world. So let's say if the Dutch have really done very well with the voluntary energy agreements as a policy instrument to promote industrial energy efficiency, getting them to actually share this with the rest of the world, because also there are no 2 countries that are the same, and what works in this country, maybe at a regional level there can be certain level of similarities, but even there, you know, individuals and industries react differently, and so you will really have to come up with some tailor-made solutions. But by bringing such platforms, what we are doing is we are facilitating the sharing of best practices and allowing then the countries to actually you know, choose which instruments would actually fit better and what do they actually maybe need to tweak to fit the reality of their countries.
Jan, you also wanted to...
Yeah, we evaluate a lot of energy efficiency programs across the world. I mean, there's no doubt that doing energy efficiency within, you know, an existing environment, take a big city, Amsterdam or London, it's a lot harder than in, you know, a new infrastructure built environment. And I think that's, again, it's a unique opportunity that UAE has. But in the end, we feel there's a strong business case and a strong return on investment for existing infrastructure, existing buildings to, you know, drive more energy efficiency programs, energy building management systems. So there is a strong ROI for existing infrastructure and buildings. It's a lot easier if you build new infrastructure and new buildings to incorporate it from the beginning. There's no question about that.
And well, we'll also hear from Jerry if there is any other question so that we can bring the...
I would say that in order to help the governments to move this forward, legislatively, a light touch is an easier way of being able to get engagement. And one of the things in the UK that's happened is getting an energy rating on all buildings. And it's a very straightforward way, because if you want to see any real development, any real movement towards best practice, I think, the old adage of if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And so I think it's critically important that if buildings have energy certificates and then you start to compare and you see best practice between buildings, then that will start to drive, just because we're all quite competitive anyway, but it will start to drive people towards making those decisions. It doesn't necessarily have to come from centralized government, let's say using the stick. Sometimes the carrot is a better approach.
I very much like what Mr. Coppola said about resources, how the city is handling its resources. And I think it's a key question. I'm dealing with circular economy, and I think this is the main issue we have to face and business has to face. And I think there's more responsibility for business and governments and international governments and consumers. I think consumers are following. Think about the digital revolution. Did we have to teach people that why digital gadgets are good? They just learn it and they use it, and we are using it now. But don't forget that we are, last year, globally, we made almost 50 million of e-waste, 50 million tons of e-waste, sorry. And only 1/6 of this 50 million tons of e-waste was recycled. So it means that we are losing a lot of resources. And it's not only an environmental and ethical question, it's a business question, because many metals, precious metals, are lost. So as a company, you should take care of your resources. It doesn't matter if it's only a gadget like a telephone, it should be upgraded. And there are many new examples of modular mobile phones as well. And also how you get back your, what happened with your material after you sell it. So I think it's a new business model, and I think business is following it. And I'm pretty sure that consumers will catch up this, but there's more responsibility for business and legislation as well.
I actually work in advertising at Leo Burnett. We're responsible for the Earth Power and promotions. I think it was also about raising awareness in the time, which wasn't today, but probably like more than 20 years ago. I'm actually a mom, and since I've been a mom, I've actually thought about these sustainable issues more. My son is probably the biggest waste creator in my life, but it's also the reason why I'm thinking about this, so there's no black and white. And when I've been thinking about this as a marketer and also as a consumer, I think in this green economy and green business, there's a lot of gray zone, because there are some obvious choices that you can make to make your lifestyle more sustainable. But sometimes, for example, I take a small example. I've been considering buying a dishwasher. And it's not an easy choice, because I'm like, is it better to buy a very high efficiency dishwasher, or is it better to continue and wash my dishes by hand? I actually don't mind washing the dishes by hand because I don't do it. It's our nanny who would do it. But so it's a question that dishwasher would obviously have a high carbon footprint because it's a big block of probably metal, plastic, and whatever is in there. Maybe I would consume less water, maybe I would consume less detergent, but overall, what is the best choice from an environment point of view? And I've been trying to think about this very hard, and I don't know if there's an answer.
Okay, thank you for these two comments, I would say. For the first one, you have an issue of organization and scale. This is the big problem. Even if you have people who are convinced, who have been facing them at city level or in some countries, in order to manage properly the waste, you have to get a proper organization to collect them. And you don't have a good collection systems in a city or in a country that takes them to be recycled so that they can create the right infrastructure, the right facility on which they have to invest in the beginning in order to get the right results. This applies to solid waste, to liquid, to any type of waste, except the small ones that you can do at home. This is different. And then the issue of scale. In order to be able to do it from an economic perspective, otherwise it would be only subsidized, you need a certain quantity to be able to do so. And that's why we're encouraging either if you have a big city where you can do it and have it properly organized, or have medium cities who can collaborate among each other and create a facility to do so. So it is feasible, but you need to put the right conditions to be able to handle that. One example, when you go to the medium cities or the large cities, is the energy accelerator. One of the 4 cases is the district energy systems, where you can create at a certain community level a kind of sharing among an area that has been selected through a grid system where you can use the energy that is wasted by some use somewhere else, and you can have this type of circular economy. It's not just science, it is something that is feasible, but you need to induce people to get organized and to support them at the first stage. For the next one, you know, of course you don't have my title. I was working on sustainable consumption and production, and now I shifted to sustainable lifestyles. We have an important program together with UNESCO on youth exchange, and we do believe that it is at the youth level that we have to do it, at school level and so on. But the messages they are getting from school and universities, unfortunately, generally speaking, do not, I will say, lead them to a sustainable lifestyle. They have to be properly educated, and their educators are not at such level, they are not well informed. They have not been, I would say, retrofit in their programs to be able to do so. My children have asked me to go to their business school and to give lectures, and the student turned to their teacher and they told them, why you don't tell us this? Why you don't explain to us where a shirt is coming from, how it is manufactured, what are the different products, how you cut the product, and so on. I cannot tell you if dishwash machine he is, this is all contextualized. We have to be very careful not to generalize. If you have a rich country in water or a poor country in water, rich country in resources or not, temperate climate, the same criteria does not apply. We have to be very careful not to extrapolate things and generalize them. It's context.
Well, if I may, at this point, we can probably go on forever with any topic. What I would suggest is to bring this discussion forward around coffee in the common areas and continue there. As I'm told, another panel is waiting for us to make space. I would like to ask everyone to join me in welcoming the panelists for their contribution.